Hello everyone, welcome back, and we are still continuing with the accounting module. And contrary to what we have in the last episode, I've made some modifications. Now I have a UI to work with. So technically we are supposed to be working with the UI in this episode. However, there is something I noticed and thought we should build first. So just to walk through the UI we have so far, if we click on this, we can access the accounting section. And here we can see the accounts we have. We can add money, which we don't have at the moment, and we'll be visiting in a future video. And we can send money, which we have done already. Then you can click this tab to visit the transaction section, which we've not built yet, and back to the account, okay? So this is what we have so far, and the reason why it's just limited to this is our focus for now is with the accounting. So I don't think it's necessary to bother about the other UI designs, okay? So before we start today's plan, I have itemized a flow of operations so as to allow us follow through the whole process, so that it can also act as a guide for me myself so that I don't go ahead speaking randomly too much, okay? And here is my guide, flow of activities. So the first operation we are going to carry out is creating the username update flow on the backend. Like I said, I want us to have an update flow, and I'm going to discuss the reason for that later on, but just work with me so that we stick to the guide and run through this as fast as possible. Then next, we create HOCs to handle auth status. I believe we know what HOC is. If not, we will talk about that when we get there. Then we'll create a store provider for storage. Yep, we're going to have a store provider for storage so as to save our active user. That will be its major use. Then we are going to update the HOC to be able to get active user. Finally, we are going to update the username, then implement the add account flow, then finally send money. So those are the order of operation, and I think with this guide, we should be able to flow things in a strict manner and not divert at any point. All right, so let's get into it. Alright guys, let's start things off by setting up the username flow. And the reason why we are doing that is, at the moment we have welcome user. And this part is meant to be the username. At the moment I have user there as just a placeholder. And I think we get the gist. So this is meant to be part of our user module, but we forgot to include it. However, it's not going to be an error because at the moment our user flow is working as it should. So we're going to treat this as a modification. So it's going to be an update. And with that said, we can come back to our backend. Here is our backend code. And one thing you will notice is that the theme has changed. So if you care to know the theme I'm using, I'll leave it in the description section so that you can update accordingly if you want to. And with that said, we want to open our DB folder, then the migrations folder. We want to add a new migration here. And we can do that if we open up our terminal. Again, we can verify within makefile to confirm the command we want to use. In this case, we are using C_M. And I think we should know the drill already. I'll just type it out. So the name I want to use will be applicable to what we are trying to do. So here we are going to add username field. Okay, and with that, we've generated two migrations, one for the up process and the other for the down process. I can clear the terminal for now. I will start with the up process. And the aim here is to alter the existing table and add a new field to it. And to achieve this, we have alter the table, then the name of the table, in this case, the users table. And here we want to add a new column. And the name of the column is username column. By the way, the quotes I'm having around this information are not really necessary. I'm just using them to emphasize on what we are trying to do. So in this case, the users is the table and the username is the column we are trying to add. Okay. Then finally, we are going to have the type, which is of varchar, and I'm going to use length 100 for this. So the field is not going to be not nullable, which we used to have, and the reason is because even though the username is going to be a required field, because we have the user table already, we don't want it to be nullable. At the moment, if we make it nullable and we migrate, then we are going to have an issue. If we make it nullable, then we will have to provide a default value, which is what we want to avoid. So even though the username is going to be required, we would control things from the code, okay? So we have the operations for the up section. Now let's do the same thing for the down section. And because it's going to be very similar, I'm going to copy this, come down to the down section. Again, we're altering the table, but this time around we are dropping the column. And this does not require the type, so we can remove it. So now that we have our migrations defined, let's make the migration. But first thing first, before we do this, we need to confirm if our Postgres server is running. And again, we can do that with docker-compose, then ps. And this is going to show the list of service running. And from here, we can confirm that it's running. So now we can have make up to migrate up. And this is going to make our migrations. And we are good on this note. So the next thing to do is to update our query so as to reflect the flow to update our username. So pulling up our queries, coming back to the user section, we can just duplicate the update user password because it's almost going to be the same thing. So I'll do that. So here we are changing the hashed password to username because now it exists within our table. And also we'll change the name here to username. Okay. And I think that's all we need to do in regards to this. And with that, we can have make SQLC. So after doing that, we have new updates within our SQLC. And one thing I want us to quickly check is within the models. Can close this for now. So within the model, where we scroll down to the user model, here we can locate the username field. However, the type is something we've not seen before. So let's dig into this and take a look at the structure. So here is the structure of a null string. It contains a string of type string, which is going to hold your information. And we have a second part, which is valid. This valid is meant to say if you have a string or not. So by default, if the string is empty, then the valid would be false. However, if you have a content within your string, then the valid will be true. So this is the way SQLC handles nullable field. So I'm pretty sure if this were to be TypeScript, it will have been the optional field, something like this. Optional, then your string value, okay? But yeah, this is Golang and we'll work with what we have here. So I thought I should let us know because it's going to influence what we are going to do next. So now we move on to the API section. We come into our user.go file and we come back to the user response struct. So now we have the username field and we should include it here. So here we can have username. And the expectation is meant to be a string. And the JSON representation is going to be username, like that. So we're using the wrong sign, so this should be backtick. Okay. All right, so now we've defined this field. How do we make provisions for this? So yeah, let's take a look at how that is done. If we come down here, we have username. And this is going to be user.username. And .string. So we want to get the string part of the username, which can be either an empty string or a valid string. Okay. So yeah, that's all we need to do in respect to this. Next, we can create the API for updating the user. So we'll come back up, create a new function. So I'm going to change this to patch because it's meant to be patch requests. We are partially updating the user content. So this is going to just be username because that's what we're updating. And in case we want to update other things later on, then we make provisions for that. And here we can have update username. So we will define this function. And we will define it just after the get logged in user. So here we have func, you then star user, then the name of our function, then the parameter, which is going to be c*gen.context, like that. So the first thing we want to do is to verify if the user is authenticated, and the flow to do that is here. However, if you remember, we've kind of minimized this, we've abstracted the flow. And if we come back to the account.go file, here is an example of that. So we'll copy this and just replace it here. Okay. And all we have to import now is the utils module. And that's done. So again, we are going to do the same thing here. So we'll get the username ID from the get active user. So this is going to verify if the user is authenticated or not. So the next thing we need is the structure for the requests. So for this, we are going to create a struct for that. So here we're going to have type username update, or rather update username struct. And the only field we need here is just the username, which is going to be of type string. And the JSON representation is going to be username. So another thing is we need this to be required, so we can specify a binding here. And this is going to be required. All right, so that's all we need for the request type definition. So next we can come down here and validate if this whole process works. So we've done this a lot of time. Here we can have if error into c.should bind JSON. But before that, we need to initialize the variable, and we can do that by having var user info of type update username. And I think this is just too generic. I can use update username type. This makes more sense. Okay, so now we have the variable here. We can add it here, user info. So if error is not null, or rather nil, not null. Okay, so this is going to be a bad request error, and I think we've done it somewhere before. Yeah, I can't find any here. I'll just define it. Let me copy one of these. So this is going to be bad request. Yeah, I think that will be all in regards to that. So now we have the user ID, and we should have the username here. So next we can define the arguments, which is going to be db.updateUsername field. So that's update username params. And here we're going to need the ID, which is going to be user ID. Then the username, which is going to be userinfo.username. Yep. So now this is another thing. The username is expected to be the SQL null field. So as a result of that, we can't just pass in the username here. We have to pass the structure. So here we are going to have SQL.nullString, this. Then we'd have the string, which is now going to be the userinfo.username. Then we can tell it that this is a valid string. So valid is true. Then finally, we would need the updated auth as well. Just like we have with updating the user password, let's confirm that. Actually, we've not defined the update user password, but that won't be a big deal. Let's just have the updated auth here. And this is meant to be a datetime.now. So we have time.now. You can just remove the add date part. All right, so here is our argument defined. Next, we can make the request itself. So we're going to have the user, comma, an error. Then here we can have u.server.query.update username. Okay, so here we're going to send the context.background, then the arguments, and that will be all. So if there's an error in this situation, then it's going to be an internal server error. So here we can have if error is not new, then we can return an internal server error. However, we just copy this and change it to an internal server error. Then finally, we can return the user. However, we have to return it with this. And we've done this somewhere else. So here it is. We just copy this and paste here. Actually, it should be c.json. Then we have http dot. Okay, so it's a status okay situation. Then we paste this. So here is our flow for updating the username, and I'm sure if we test this with our Postman, it should work. Also looks like there's an issue here, I'm not sure why. Okay, from my observation, it looks like the spacing might be the issue. So this spacing. Yep, so that was the issue. So I think that's another thing to learn. We shouldn't have spacing there. All right, so we've made the update for the username flow, and now let's test if this is working. So clear this out and make stats. Let's pull up our Postman. So I think we get the flow. We need to log in first. So here is our login URL, and this is our user. So we are logged in. Now let's test updating the username. Or before that, let's get the me user. So here is users.me, and if we change the authorization token. So at the moment, we can say that the username is empty. Okay. So let's test the update username. So we change this to a patch request. And this is going to be user's name. Then also we set the authorization. Then we define the body. So without any body, let's see what happens. So we get this issue that the username field is required. So let's provide the username. All right, and as we can see, we got our user back with the username. So that's the flow tested, and we are good on that part. And that's the end of the first section, setting up the username flow. So we'll take some time off, and we'll come back to set up our HOC. All right, guys, welcome back. So before we get into coding out our HOC, I'll quickly explain what the HOCs do. I'm pretty sure some of us are aware of this, but for those of us that are not fully aware of what an HOC does, I'll quickly explain what it does. So here on the panel here, I'm going to create two boxes, and we are going to have two HOCs. However, before we even get into that, what exactly is an HOC? So an HOC is an higher order component, and it serves as a wrapper for other components. And in this case, we want to handle two components categories. We want to handle authenticated components as well as the unauthenticated components. So here I'm going to have HOC 1, and here I'm going to have HOC 2. And HOC 1 would hold components such as our login and our register. And if we have other components that we don't need to log in to access, then we can have it within our HOC 1. Then HOC 2 we hold components that we require login to access, e.g. would be our account dashboard. Okay, and so on. So HOC 1, the way it's going to work is such that if we are logged in and we access the components here, we would be redirected back to the dashboard. And for HOC 2, if we are not logged in and we try to access the components within HOC 2, it will redirect us to the login. So that's just all it does in lay term, okay? So with that said, let's go back into our front end now to code this out. So back within our front end, the same UI as well for my VS Code. So I can come down within the app. And here, if you are wondering if you used to have your components outside the app folder, I have moved it within the app folder because from research, I found out that having it within the app component makes more sense. More literally, having your TSS files within the app component makes more sense. So here I've left the utils here, and because it holds the TS content, okay? So within the components folder, I'm going to create a new folder and call it HOCs, okay? And here also I have a hooks folder, and all this came about as a result of me setting up the UI. So within here, I borrowed the use modal hook I used within my Geos project. So it's a straightforward hook, and I believe we can all use it. At the end of the day, I'm going to push my update here to the repo so we can easily check. I don't think this is going to be a major concern, and that's why we won't talk so much about it. So back to the HOCs, I'm going to create the without HOC. And this is going to be a TSS file because it's going to return a component. So let's quickly have the structure. All right, so here is the structure of an HOC. So an HOC by itself is just a function. However, within the function, we have a component we can access. This is the component. And finally, we can make modifications within here and return our wrapper component itself. So you'll be wondering, where does this props come from? So let's take a look at one of the places we are going to use the HOC. So here, again, I've made some modifications here, which you've not seen, and it's all in preparation to have the UI in place. So here is the component itself, and this is going to come into the withAuth HOC as the wrapper component. And that's why the type is of React component type. So this is a component, okay? And the props itself is meant to be information available within the props. So let's say we are going through the route of Next.js server-side rendering, and we get server content here, which we used to do in the past. When we send it back to the component, it's going to come in as a props. So this prop is going to come in here. So this is where we would have access to that props, okay? However, we are having an issue here of not knowing the type of the prop. And this is where we can introduce generics, okay? And here we're going to define the generic for this. So we're going to come here. This is going to be T extends object, like that. And I'm going to pass this T within the component. So it means whatever type the component defines, we are going to obtain it from here. And we are expecting the props to be of that type because your props is meant to be your component type, okay? So here, this is going to be of type T. So now that has been resolved. So the next thing here is to have our logic. So again, this HOC is meant to wrap our authenticated pages. So in this case, the dashboard needs to be authenticated before you can access it. So what that means is, if you try to access these components, which we have here, and you are not authenticated, it would redirect you back to the login page. So how do we verify if you're authenticated or not? And the basic way we want to know this is to know if we have your authorization token on our local storage, okay? And to set that, we will need to go back to our login process, back within the login page. In here, when we got our response back, we didn't bother to know what the response entails. All we do is just push to the dashboard page. However, we actually want to get some information about the response before pushing here. And the information we need here is the authorization token. So just to give an idea of what I mean here, I'm going to console.log the response.data. So that's an expectation. And I will ignore this. So back within our browser. So here, like I said, we can be on this page whether logged in or not. And we can go to the login page whether logged in or not as well. So let's try to log in with an active user. So we have me at example.com, then the password. So at the moment we commented out moving to the dashboard, and that's why it didn't do anything. And if we come to the console, we will see that we have an object with the token information. So the takeaway from here is that we have access to the token within the data. And because we are using TypeScript, we won't just assume that the token is here. We are going to define a type for it, and we are going to check within that type. So we don't need any of this. Neither do we need this. So here I'm going to define an interface for my login type. So I'm going to have interface login type. And for my login type, all I require from here is just the token of type string. Okay? And now the expectation here is a response, as we can see. So the format here is either a void or a zeros response. And the reason why it's a void is because we cached it. So once we cache this and there is an error, then it becomes a void. It doesn't return anything. It only returns the easiest response when there is no error. So what we want to do is we want to bind this to the type we just defined. But by default, it's meant to be an easiest response. So we are going to have easiest response first, like this. Then we are going to add the login type to it. So this now allows it to constrain it to the login type. So the data is meant to be of the login type structure, okay? So by default, in other programming languages like Go, what we've done here might not work. And this is because the data here, the type here can either be a void or the structure. However, we are constraining it to the structure. So this is something we can get away with by using TypeScript or JavaScript in general. So I just thought I should let you know about that. So here, if there is no error, that's how we could get here. So we're expecting this structure to be available at this point. So here we can now have .token, and we have access to that. So that's about that. However, what we want to do here is to store this token within our local storage. And we can easily achieve that by having local storage .set item. And here we're going to need the key we want to use to remember our token and the token itself. And for this reason, I'm going to come back to my utils, create a constants file. And here I want to define the token for my user token. So here I'm going to export const user token key. And this is going to be a name that is kind of unique to our application. I'm going to give it FinGreat user token, like that. So coming back here, I can have the user token key, then the token itself. And after doing that, I can remove the console and I can allow the push again. So coming back into our browser, let's try to log in again. Okay, there seems to be an error. Yeah, I went to remove the router. I thought we were not using it, but we were. So let me return it back. All right, so that was it about that. And now let's try it again. All right, so now we are back here. The only difference now is if we come back to our application and the local storage by default, it might be closed. But when you open it up, you want to locate your domain. And when you click on it, you get to see it here. So here is our token here. And I think a best principle not to have a space here. But that won't be an issue because we have a variable for it, so we can work with this. And if we zoom in, here is what our token looks like, okay? So now we can use this information to undo our HOC. So if we go back into our HOC code, so in here, we want to check if the token exists. So if the token exists, that means we are logged in and we can continue to here. However, if the token does not exist, then we are not logged in and we should be redirected to the login page. So let's make preparation for this. So first, I'm going to need a state of checking, okay? So I can have const checking, set checking, and this is going to be use state. By default, this is going to be true. So let's import use state. Okay. So while we are checking, instead of returning the components, I want to return a loading screen. So if checking, return h3 loading, please wait. Okay, so that would do. If we come back here and refresh, okay, and we are not getting anything because we've actually not used this HOC. So let's quickly use it. If we come back to our dashboard page, and we can wrap the HOC with this, so withAuth, and we have our component here. So now let's check again. So as you can see, we are currently within the checking state and we have this loading screen. So you can style your loading screen whichever way you want. So back within withAuth. So here we want to check if we have the token, and now to do this within a use effect. So use effect. So I'm using an empty array here, which signifies component did mount. And in here, I want to get access to my local storage. However, you can only have your local storage within the client side. And we are sure that this is going to be the client side since this is component did mount. So it means we've mounted our component, JavaScript is loaded, it's on the client side. So here we can have const user token equals to local storage dot get item. Remember, we are going to use our user token key. Okay. So, and our check would be straightforward. If user token, if we have the user token, we want to set the check-in to be false because at that point we know that the user exists. So here we can have set check-in to be false. Else, we want to redirect back to the login page. So for this, we are going to need the router. So let's get access to it. Then we can define it here. Okay. So if we don't have the token, we want to have router.push, then the login page. Okay. So let's test this out. If we refresh, we get the loading screen, then we get this page. And that's because we are able to verify that the token exists. However, if we remove this token by clicking on the token and clicking on the star here instead of this, so this will remove everything. This will just remove the one you selected. And we refresh. Now it takes us back to the login page. Okay. So now that is the first part of our HOC. So the second one is if we log in, let's log in again. And so now we are logged in again and we have the token defined again. But this time around, if we go to the login, we can still stay here. However, we don't want to stay here since we are logged in. And that's where the second HOC comes in. So we come back to our code. We can modify this same HOC to do the same thing, to handle the two scenarios. But then it makes our code messy, okay? So we have separation of concern as part of the quality of a good developer. And as a result of that, let's just have this as a separate HOC. So we come back here, we duplicate this. They are going to be similar. And I'm going to name this withoutAuth, like that. So again, I'm going to have the name withoutAuth. So I call this withAuth, but most times we'll just call this wrapper because it's the wrapper. So I'll change it to wrapper. Probably we'll change the first one as well. And with that, whenever we want to define an HOC, all we get to change is just the function name. The wrapper remains the same. So yeah, we have this as well. However, in the case of this HOC, if the token exists, then we want to redirect to the dashboard. So router.push. Yep, that's the path we are going. And if the token does not exist, we want to stay within this component. So here we are going to have set checking to be false. Okay. So now we can come back to our login and wrap this with the withoutAuth. The same thing for our register as well. Okay. So now, as we can see, we are redirected back to the dashboard. So if you try to check it out again, redirected back to the dashboard. So one more thing though is, if we click on the accounting page, yeah, this is the accounting. At the moment, we don't have the HOC for this, so we have to wrap it as well. So we'll come back here, accounting page, because we need authorization to be able to access this page as well. So here we have withAuth, and yeah, we are good on that note. Alright guys, so this is all we have to do to set up our HOC for now. If you remember, we still have the updating the HOC part. So we are still going to make some modifications for it, but for now we have the basic shape of an HOC. And this will be a good time to take a time out and reflect on what we've done so far. I will come back and continue from there. Alright guys, another thing we are going to need in preparation for getting the ActiveUser for the HOC side is going to be our StoreProvider. So for those of us that are familiar with Redux, this is also going to be something you can create with Redux. But we can just make use of the React useContext for this. And I think our project is small enough for useContext to surface, okay? So on that note, let's get started with this. So our StoreProvider is going to be within our component. So here I'm going to create a new file, StoreProvider. And this is because it's going to return a component that we can wrap around all other components, okay? Mostly all other components that is going to require the data within our StoreProvider. So see the StoreProvider as a means to provide data that can be used across all your components instead of sending data through props. Again, this is not a beginner's tutorial, so I won't go too deep into that. So let's quickly make the preparations for this. We are going to need the create context from React. So import from React, create context. Also, we want to have an initial state, and here we can have const initial state equals to ActiveUser. By default, ActiveUser will be null. But we will need a type for this initial state. So here we can come interface store props. And for our store props, we want to have the ActiveUser. And for the ActiveUser, we are going to need a user type. For now, I'm going to define that type here. We are going to be moving it later on because this is not going to be its major place. So here I'm going to have interface user type. And the user type is just going to contain the fields we are going to be providing from the backend. So this is going to include the ID, which is of type string, the created at, which is of type string. Again, the text I'm writing here has to match with what is being sent from the backend, okay? Then we have the updated at, again, type string, the email address, type string, and finally the username. Optional, type string, but I don't think the optional here would be necessary because it's going to come in as a type string, but an empty string anyways. So you'll be wondering, the expectation from the backend for the ID is going to be number. So why are we using a string? Well, if we use a string, it's going to be converted to a string. And I think we can use a string because we are not validating with the ID. So we are not validating a type. So this should work. So most times, if you are not validating with the value itself, it's okay to just have it as a string. You really need the type when you are sure you want to make validations with it. So now that we have the type, here we can have the user type. However, the user type can both be a user type or a null, which is what we have by default. So now we can match this with the store props, and we are good. So the next thing we want to do is to create our contests. And the result of creating a contest is a store. So here we can have const store, which is equals to create contests. And creating a contest takes in the initial states and the dispatch information. So initial states is equals to initial states. Then the dispatch, for now, is just going to be an empty call that returns null, like this. So this is our store. Now that we have the store, the next thing is to define the store wrapper itself. And like I said, this is going to be a component that wraps around our components that are going to require our data. So this is the data we defined here. By default, the ActiveUser is null. So now let's have the structure. Here we're going to have StoreProvider. And this is going to be a functional component. The major reason for that is we want to have children within it. So here I can have the children, and this would be React.react-node. Okay? So in here, I can get information about the children, but I have to import the functional component first. So now I can get access to the children, if it will allow me. Okay? Now I can have access to the children. So at the end of the day, I want to have access to the provider within my store, and I can deconstruct it. So here I can have const, and I have the store here. So within the store, I can get access to the provider, which is this. Then finally, I can return the provider. And within the provider, I can specify my children. But the provider requires some information, which is the value. And the value is going to be an object of states and a dispatch. At the moment, though, we don't have any of this information. So where are they coming from? So to achieve or to get this information, we are going to make use of the use reducer. So here we can have const use reducer, like that. And a use reducer takes in a reducer function as well as the initial states. However, at the moment, we don't have a reducer function. So let's just provide the initial state for now. So we have the initial states. Okay. So now let's define the function we want to have for the reducer. So here, a reducer is a function that takes in two parameters. The states, which is going to be our store props, and the action. And the structure for the action we've not defined yet. Let's do that. So I'll call this const action, or rather interface action type. So our action type is going to have an action, which will be of type string, then a payload, which is meant to match what the action performs. In this case, the payload is going to be of user type. Okay? So we're going to modify this later on because string is just too generic. We want this to be specific to the action we want to perform. And based on that, we are going to have action types. So action types can be an enumerator. So here I can have an enum, action types. And the first action type I want to have is updating the user. So I can have update user. And the string information here, again, can be update user. So you can be specific to what you want here. So if you have a lot of update user, you can make this unique. The whole point is just to ensure that this is unique. So now instead of having just a string here, we want the action here to be action types dot update user. And in that respect, we are certain that the payload we need for this action type would be the user type. Okay? So now we can have this as the action type. And the response from a reducer is meant to be a new state. So here we are going to have the stop props. So what this is doing is going to get information about the former state, get information about your action, then check the action. In this case, it's a update user action. Then with that information, it's going to update the active user. Okay? So let's actually perform this. So we want to check if action dot action, or rather this should not be action, this should be type. Okay? So if action dot type is equivalent to action types dot update user, then at this point we are certain that we are trying to update the user. So now we can return the default state information. However, we want to change the active user information. And this is going to be the action.payload. Okay? But by default, if nothing happens, we want to return the state. Oh, okay. This should have an arrow sign. All right. So now this is our reducer function, which we can pass within here. Reducer. So within the use reducer, after passing all this information, we can get access to the states as well as the dispatch. Actually, this is not meant to be the construction is meant to be a state pattern. Like this. So use reducer and use state is actually closely related. The only difference is that you can do this with use reducer, which you can do with use states, okay? So now we have these two information. However, it's complaining about our dispatch here. And the reason is, this is our provider, which we obtained from the store. And it's trying to infer the type for the dispatch from here. However, based on our reducer function, a dispatch actually takes in an action type, as you can see here. So based on that, we are going to kind of define a type here. Here we can specify the state, which is going to be the store props. And the dispatch is going to be a function that takes in something. So let's have that something. I'll call it T as type action type. Then returns a void, so it doesn't return anything. So it looks like we have an issue with our initial states. Yep. So we only specify initial state here. This should actually be states equals to initial states. So I'll format this. All right, so I have things formatted now, and this is the type we have for our create contest. And with that done, as you can see, there is no longer any issue. Okay, so our store provider is now available. The next thing now is to make use of the store provider. So because I want the data to be available throughout our application, I'm going to have the store provider within the layout here. So I'm going to wrap the body with the store provider. So here I'm going to have the store provider. If I have exported it, I don't think I have. Yep, I have not. So here I'm going to have export default store provider. Okay, so coming back to the layout, store provider like this, and I can provide my contents. So now this is going to make the data available throughout our components. And to actually test this, I can come back to my default page. I can create a use effect. So let me just show you what this use effect is doing. So let me uncomment it. Let me come back to my code. So it's complaining of use reducer. So why is this complaining? So you are importing a component that needs use reducer. It only works on the client component, but none of its parents is marked use client. So yeah, I think there is a simple fix for that. If we come back to the store provider, yep, we have to mark this as use client. So let's see if this fixed our issue. Yep, so that fixed it. So here is the modal you get after uncommenting that. So the whole idea here is in preparation for when we want to update the user. So if we confirm that the username does not exist, then we will prompt the user with this modal to fill in the username and we can update. So that's just about that. So coming back into the page here, we want to comment this out for now. So I was talking about how to test our provider. So to test our store provider, we are going to make use of useContext here. However, I just realized something now. We have to export some stuff. So we have to export the store. So export const store. We have to export the action types as well. I think that's all we have to export. So let's come back to the page. We have the useContext now. And here we can have consts. We're going to destructure something. And here we are going to have useContext. And we want to specify our store here. Okay. And now we can have access to the states. And we can get access to the ActiveUser. Also, if we want to dispatch something, we have access to the dispatch, but we won't bother about that. So remember, our ActiveUser is null. So here I can console log that. Okay. So let's take a look. So as you can see, ActiveUser is null. So let's put something within the ActiveUser. So if we come back here, so instead of having null, let me have ID. Okay, so that's the structure for my ActiveUser, and let's confirm. And as we can see, we can confirm that our store provider is working. So let's clean things up again. So let's just return back to null. And we'll be good. So on this note, we are done creating our store provider, and this is in preparation for the next part, which is getting the ActiveUser. So again, let's take the time out and we'll come back to implement that. All right, guys, welcome back and let's move forward. So at the moment, we are currently logged in. However, one thing we can do is if we come back to our inspection and come back to the application, then our token. So here is our token, and after leaving it for a while, this token should have expired. And we can confirm that if we come back here. This is Postman. We want to try to get the ActiveUser. So I'm going to provide the token here. And now when I make the request, I get token as expired. However, if we refresh here, nothing happens. We stay logging. So one thing we want to do is whenever we refresh, we want to check if the user is still active, okay? And that was why we actually defined the store provider, so that when we get the active user, we can store it within our store provider. And getting a user is quite straightforward. It's just going to be an access request to a server with the authorization token. And because of that, so if we come back to our code, here's our front end, we can clean things up a little bit. Okay, so we want to make this request within our without HOC. So we make the request to get the active user after confirming that the user token exists. However, one issue I think we are going to have here is reusing Axios requests. So to make the request, we are going to need Axios. So we can import that. Import Axios from Axios. So once we have the token here, we are not going to set checking to false immediately. So we can ignore this. Instead, we are going to further make a request to get the active user. So here we're going to have const response or just res equals to await. So we want to await the Axios requests, but because we are doing this within useEffect, we won't be able to do that because technically we are supposed to have an async function. But doing this with useEffect will not allow us. So instead, we are going to define a new function for this. So const and do auth. And now this can be an async function. And we can just copy everything we have here and paste here. And within here, we can just make the call and do auth. So now we have async here and we have const res. So we want to await Axios.get. Here we want to specify the me URL. So if we come back to our utils network, at the moment, we only have the auth URL. So now let's define the user URL. So export const user URL. And here I want to have the me URL. So again, we have the base URL plus users. So we need slash here first, then plus slash me. Okay. So now we can come here and have user URL dot me. So that is the first part. But because this request is meant to make use of our authorization token, we'll need to specify an authorization header. And we can easily do that by adding an extra config. And here we can specify headers. And for the headers, I want to specify the authorization header. So here I can have authorization, which is going to equals to string representation bearer, then space, the token. So we're going to have the user token. Okay. So this looks cool, and if we make this request, we are going to get our results. However, one thing I realize now is we'll be making a lot of repetition. So because we also want to cache the error here, and if we come back to our login, we already did that. So we'll be repeating the same process. So instead of doing that, let's create an Axios handler that abstracts all this process. And we can come back to our utils. Here, create an Axios handler. So we're going to define a type, but let's define the structure first. So const Axios handler is going to take in some parameter. We are going to define that later on. However, after everything, we want to export default Axios handler. Okay. So let's define a type for Axios handler. So here we can have interface Axios handler type. And here we are going to need the method. The method can be of the following type. It's either a get method or a post method or a pass method. So in the future, if you need more methods, then we can include it. But for now, these are the ones I want to consider. Then next, we need the URL, which is going to be of type string. Then next, we need an optional data. And the structure for my data is going to be key valued pair. So here I'm going to have a key of type string and a value of any. Okay, so the value can be a number, it can be a string, Actually, I think those are the possibilities for now. We are not sending any object. So I'm going to make the value of type number or a string. Okay. So in the future, if there's any change, we can easily update that. The next thing is to check if we want to cache error. So here I can have undo error. And this is going to be an optional Boolean operation like that. And the whole idea here is if we come back to our login page, we are able to cache the error using the error handler here. So the error handler shows a toast of our error. So just the same way, we want to tell if we want to undo the error or not. So there are some situations where you want to deal with your error yourself. So that's why we are making this a Boolean operation. So here we are trying to create the easiest handler to be generic as possible. Okay. Then finally is authorized. And this is just a check to tell if the request should be authorized or not. So if we come back to the without, so instead of having to set the headers every time, we want to confirm if the request is authorized or not. And if it's a authorized request, then the headers would be placed by default. Okay. So those are the information we are going to be working with. And with that, we can come here and have the Axios handler type. And here we can destructure it. So we want to have access to the method, to the URL, to the data. In the case of the undo error, we want this to be true by default. So here I can have undo error to be true. And here I can have is authorized. Okay. So now we have that. So here we want to define our config for our Axios config. So I can have const config, which is equals to URL and method. Okay. And also data, I guess. So these are the initial config I want to have for the Axios config. So now we can check if it's authorized. We can expand the config. So we can have config dot headers. But that's going to be an issue because the headers is not defined by default. So here we can just have the headers by default as an empty object. So now I can access the headers. So config.headers. And I can set my authorization here. So authorization. And this is going to be our bearer. So that means we need to get the token. So const user token, which is equals to local storage.get item. And this will be user token key. So here we can have bearer, then space, then the authorization token, which is user token. Okay. So now we've included the headers in case we want this request to be authorized. So now we can set up the Axios request itself. So here we can have const requests or response equals to await. So that means this is an async function. And since this is an async function, we also want to specify what the return type is. Again, this is an async function. So that means we are going to be returning a promise. But what exactly is the type of our promise? We want to specify that as a generic. So we are going to have generic T here. And we'll specify that here. So that means whatever result we want to have, we are going to provide it from the requester. Okay. So here we are going to have Axios. We would import that like this. Then instead of having .get or anything, we can just specify our config directly like that. Then the next one is to cache the error. Again, this is going to be error of Axios error. Then we can come down to our handling. So here we want to confirm if we want to undo the error or not. So if that's the case, we may probably want to adjust this T a little bit. So let's define a response type. So here I can have interface response type. Okay. And this is going to take in a T for generics. And here I'm going to have the data of type generics, that T. So we're just sending the T here. And here we are going to have this of type is use error or null. Okay, so now instead of returning just T, we are going to be returning response type of T. Okay, so that's what we are going to have now. So if we catch the error, we can then bind the expectation as is use response, then we specify our T. So that means it's going to bind the response to the type we specified. So by default, I'm going to let error equals to null. So what that means is at the end of the day, I can have return into data would be response.data and error would be error. Okay, like that. And since error is the same thing as error, I can just remove this. Okay. However, if we do not want to undo the error, that means we want error to be equals to E. Okay. So again, handling error is set to happen by default. That's why it's true here. So here, instead of just setting this directly, we can check if undo error. So this one would happen in an else situation. So if undo error, we can come back to the login side. We want to do this. We want to call on the error handler. So let's import it. All right, so I think that's all we need to do to define our is handler. So let's save this. Okay. So now coming back to the without, or before that, let's update our login flow. So again, let's define a new response here. So const response equals to await is handler. And here we can define the method. The method in this case is a post request. So the method is going to be posts. The URL is going to be authurl.login. I think that's all we need to do in regards to that. So next we can specify the type we want to return. So the type is going to be the login type, like that. So with that, I think we no longer need this. So as you can see, because our return type from the is handler has it as data, we are still able to maintain the same structure, okay? So I'm assuming this would work, so I won't bother about that too much. So instead, I'm going to come back to my withAuth and make the changes with the latest updates. So here I'm going to await is handler. Then again, I'm going to specify my method. In this case, the method is get. Then the URL is going to be user-url.me. And this time around, I can tell it that the request is going to be an authorized request. So is authorized equals to true. So now we don't have to specify the authorization token header any longer. Okay. So if res.data, so if we are able to get our data back, and actually if we come back to our login, we should be checking for if res.data now. Okay. And if that's the case, that means the data here should be optional, okay? So also when we come here, this should be optional. So there's a possibility that response is null. So if response exists, then we want to get data within it. So yeah, I think that's what we need to do on that note. So coming back here, if res.data, so that means we're able to get the user back. And this is where we want to define the user type. So I can remove the ASIOs because we are not using it again. And I can come back to my store provider. So here I'm going to remove the user type, come back to my withAuth and define it here. However, I can export it so as to use it somewhere else. So we can import it here. User type. Okay, that's better. So back here, we want to specify the type we are expecting. So here I can specify the user type and we are good to go. So now here, if we are able to get the user back, I want to store the user within our storage, okay? And to do that, I can just have const, the structure, then we have useContext. And in here, I'm going to specify my store, like that. So here I'm going to have dispatch. Then I want to have the state as well. So here we can have the ActiveUser. So after getting the user here, I want to update with our active user. So here I can have dispatch. And for dispatch, we are going to have the type. And for the type, we are going to have action types dot update user. And for our payload is going to be res.data. Okay. However, we don't want to do this every time we change the page. We only want to do this whenever we refresh. So that means we're also going to have this within a check. So if user token and if not active user. So if we don't have an active user, that's when we want to make this request. So if res.data, then we do this. Else, if we're not able to get the user, that means there is an issue with our token. In that case, we want to log out. So here I can define a logout function called logout because we are going to use it later on. And the logout function is going to take in a router. And this is going to be router instance. Let me confirm where we've used our router. So app router instance, like that. For our logout, all we'll be doing is removing the token from the local storage. We can have local storage dot remove item. Then we have the user token key. Then go back to the login page. So router dot push, then the login page. Okay, so that's our logout. So we're able to access this particular part of our function because we have the token. However, in trying to make a request to get our user, we couldn't. That means the token is probably bad. So because of that, we want to log out. And as a result of that, we are not setting checking to false. So we're only going to set checking to false when we are able to get our data. So after dispatching the data, I will set checking to false. And that's all we need to do to get the active user. So now if we come back, so there is an error. Let's refresh. Network error. Okay, so looks like there is a cost issue when we try to make a request to get the active user. And I'm guessing the issue is as a result of introducing a new header. So if we come back to our backend, we can easily fix this. So come back to the server. Let's close the terminal for now. So in here, we are using the default course. And if you take a look at this, here is the structure. So here's the configuration for the default course. And if you look further, here is the default config as we have here. And according to this, the only headers that we are accepting includes this, okay? We don't have the authorization here. So to fix this, we are going to define a custom course handler. And this is the structure. So we have func. I'll copy all this. Come back to the server, come back up here and define my course handler. So again, it's going to return a gene handler function. That's the structure. And we can set course here. So course.defaultConfig. Also course.new here. Okay. So we have the basic structure just like we have it with the defaults. So the only thing we want to do now is we want to append the authorization header to the headers. So to do this, we can have config.allow headers like that. And we're going to append this to the existing header. So we have append. So here we're going to have config.allow headers. Okay. And we can access this because by default, that is what course.defaultConfig is transferring to config. So again, if we take a look, we have this, okay? So we're going to add the authorization token to this. All right, so now with that defined, we can replace this with my course handler. So this should be handler, not Andrew. Okay, so the server should be back and running. Let's test again. All right, so now we get the error token has expired. And since token has expired, we should be redirected back to the login. So why are we still staying on this page? Let's verify that. Oh, okay, we only wrote logout here. We didn't call the function. So we call the function, then we specify the router. So now we are redirected back to the login and we are able to stay there, which looks cool. So now if we log in, so me@example.com, end of file, what exactly is that? Bad requests. Oh, okay, I think we didn't send data with our login. So we come back to the login page here. Yeah, we didn't send data, so we should send data, which is going to be the argument. Okay. So let's try again. All right, so we're able to log in now. And now we have access to the active user. So if our token has an issue, whenever we refresh the page, we are going to be logged out. I think we are still outputting the user information. Let's go remove this. So the default page here, so here is where we are outputting the user. Actually, we still need the active user here, but we don't want to show it yet. So instead of just having this as a user, we want to have active user dot username or user. So if active user dot username does not exist, then it shows the user. So let's confirm this. Okay, so it doesn't exist. We have the user. Also, this is an avenue to just implement this logout because at the moment it's not working. So let's quickly do this. We have a logout function. Actually, I think the logout function should be a hook. If we come back to our front end, come back to the without. So I think this function should be a hook. That way it's able to hold its own router. So we have hooks here. Here I can have use logout. Okay. So here I can have const use logout. And here I can just come back to my withAuth, copy this function, logout function, come back here, paste it here. So this is going to be what I'm returning at the end of the day. So I'm returning the logout like that. Here I don't need the router again. Here I can just get access to the key. And instead I can just have const router equals to use router from next navigation. Okay, I think this is better. So now we can come here. I think we've not exported this yet. So export default use logout. Okay, that's better. Can come back here, const, okay, then have use logout. And here we can have logout. So now we don't need to specify any param. And here, instead of just pushing to login, we can just use logout. So now our code is even more cleaner. We can remove this and we can remove this. Also, we can remove this. So that's much more better. Okay. So we're talking about the logout tests. Okay. And this is within our main layout. We can come back here. Here we don't need the router. So instead we can have a destructure, then use logout like that. And here we can have logout. So here we can have on click logout. So we no longer need this and we have a much more cleaner code. So if we come back here, we're refreshing. Let's refresh again. Okay, I don't know why that was happening. But now we can log out by clicking this. We get back here and we can relog in if we want to. Yeah, it looks like we didn't set check-in to be off. I don't know, let's confirm. So coming back to our withAuth. So if res.data, okay, I think I see what is going on. So let me recreate this. So if we refresh this, we no longer have our active user. So as a result of that, we're able to go through this flow. However, if we log out, the active user is still there. We've not removed it. But one thing you will note is that if we come back to our code, here we are only going to make these requests if we don't have this active user, but it's there. So this is a correct flow. The error we are having is not removing this active user when we are supposed to. So when we log out, aside from just removing the user token, we also want to remove the active user. So again, we are going to update our store provider a little bit. So instead of the payload for this being just user type, it can also be null. Okay? So that's all we have to do there. And here we can come back. The structure equals to useContext. Then we specify our store. So here we need the dispatch. So if we are logging out, we want to remove the active user. So here we're going to have dispatch. The type is going to be action types dot update user, and the payload is going to be null. Okay, so we want to have it like this before we log out. So let's test this again. All right, so let's log out. Okay, we are good again, and let's try to relog in. So now we are back, which makes more sense. So that's the flow we want. And with this, we are done with setting up the active user. So the next item on our list is updating the username, because at the moment, the user does not have a username. And let's quickly make a preparation for that. So if we come back to our front-end code on the dashboard, here. So here we can have a control. So we have access to the active user here. We can just make a check. If not, active user dot username, then show modal. Okay. And since we are seeing the user, that means we don't have the username. Okay, let's confirm this. All right, so we get this, and this is where we're going to start after taking this type out. All right, guys, welcome back. So it's time to implement our username updates. And this will have been quite easy, if not for a situation that I'm going to show us now. So if you come back to our code here, and here is the update user section. So let me come in here and quickly set up a use effect flow. So here I'm going to come back to the error handler, and I'm going to copy this toast information. Come back to the update user, set a timeout so that we get to see it actually. So this is going to kick off after 3 seconds. So I'll import this toast. So the type for this, I think I can ignore that. So I'll just show something. This is a toast. All right, so coming back to our browser, let me refresh once again. Okay, our token has expired. Let's log in. All right, so as you can see from here, the toast is not seen and it's actually under the modal. And the reason for this is if we come back to our code and we check out what our modal is made up of, it is made up of the latest HTML dialog, which tends to push things to the front layer. So as a result of this, any package that you are not really aware of might not work well. So one way I've found to fix this is by utilizing our store provider still. So to fix this, I can come back here, store provider, add any information to our store props, modal state. So the modal state can either be true or false. So here I can define the modal state. And by default, this is going to be false. However, there is going to be an issue with our reducer now. Let's try to do that. So if action type is equivalent to action types.set modal state, so that means we still have to define this. Set modal state. So now we can have action types.set modal states. So the problem here is that we don't have a payload to ascribe here, okay? To fix this, we can just have the action type as this, or we can just join it together. And that means this has to change to type. So that means we can have action type.update user or action types.set modal state. And in the case of set modal state, the payload will be a Boolean type. So now with that, we can return the state, then update the state. So here we are going to have the modal state. And here we're going to have action.payload. So yeah, that's all we have to do to fix that. So now what happens when we pull up our modal? So let's do that. We'll come back to use modal. So this is the function we use to either show our modal or close our modal. So whenever we show our modal, we want to set the modal state to be true. And whenever we close it, we'll set it to be false. So let's do that. We need to get access to our context. So const, the structure equals to useContext. Then we get the store. Okay. So now we can get the splash here, which is all we need. Or rather, so I thought. Actually, I'm going to need the state as well. And from the state, I need the modal state. So whenever I show my modal, I want to dispatch. The type is going to be action types dot set modal states, and the payload is going to be true. That means the modal state is true. Then once I'm done showing the modal, when I'm closing the modal, I want to dispatch this to be false. That's the first aspect. So now to the second aspect. When we're defining the toasts, when we come back here, here is our toast container. However, because I want to get access to my store and the modal state from it, I can't use it directly here. So the layout is meant to be handling both the server side and the client side. So instead, I'm going to create an extra component. So I can come back to my components, toasts layout.tsx, and I can just quickly construct this. All right, so that's the structure. Now I can come back to the layout, remove this, and use the toast layout. Yep, so there's an issue because we've not finished the structure. So let's come back here. Let's return the toast container we copied like that. And we can come back here to get the old imports. So now we shouldn't have an issue. So now here, I want to confirm if we have the modal state or not. So here I can have const. Again, we want to have useContext. Then the store. So for this, all we need is just the states, then the modal states. So I want to show this toast container only when the modal is not active. So that's the whole idea. So when the modal is not active, I want to show this toast container. So I can check if not modal states, then I can show this. So actually, let me bring this in. However, if the modal state is active, that means we are showing a modal. Then we just want to return null. Okay, so that's all we have to do here. And our layout is complete now. So coming back to the use modal. So here, we also want to have access to the toast container. And the whole point here is I want to have that toast container within my dialog. So here I can have if modal states. That is, if the modal is showing, then and show the toast container like that. So it's going to import it, and we are good. So that's what we have to do to fix it. And let's confirm if we come back to our browser. There seems to be an issue. Yep. So let me come back to the toast layout. I can tag this as use client. Okay. Let's refresh. Okay. And now there is no issue. But now we have the toast showing. Okay. So we can see the toast now. We don't know why it's showing true though. So that's just by the way. We can close the toast layout. We can close the layout. We no longer need it. Use the modal to is done. We are good with the store provider. So now we can remove this. We are good on this note. So here we are able to access this page because we don't have the username. So we want to update the username. And we've done this within our login page already. It should be quite easy. So the first thing first, I'm going to define a ref. So const form equals to use ref. And I'm going to define a type here. So we can get that from the auth component. And here is the structure for the ref. Okay. So here I'm going to have ref, which is equals to form. Then I'm going to define my onSubmit function. So here we have access to the E, and again, we can get that from the logout page. So E is of this type. We can copy it and come back here and reuse. So we have to import the form event. And this onSubmit is going to be an async operation. Okay, cool. So the next thing is to get the data. Again, we can come back here and get the structure. So we need the argument, we need set loading, we need a lot of things. So I'll just copy this whole part, paste here, define my loading state. So const loading, set loading, use states. By default, the loading state is going to be false. So this should be small letter set loading. Okay. So this should just be form and not form ref. The same thing here. And we only need one information. So here we are going to change this to the username. And this would be username as well. Okay, so that's our structure. The next thing is to make our requests. But before that, I want to define our loading here. So disable is going to be loading. So we disable the button when it's loading. Then here we can have if loading and show this triple dots. So that's all we want to do in regards to that. So now let's make our request. And before that, we are going to need to set the URL. So coming back here we're going to have update username, base URL plus users plus username. Okay. So coming back here, we can have const response. So we're expecting the user as a response. So here we're going to have await is use handler. Then the type is going to be the user type. Then we specify our config. So method is going to be of type hash. The URL is going to be of type user URL dot update username. Then also this is going to be an authorized request. So it's authorized equals to true. And I think those are the information we need to set. So if res.data, that means our request was successful. Also, we need to specify our data. So data is equals to arg. Okay. So if the request was successful, we want to update our active user. And also we will need to remove our modal or close our modal, so to say. So that means we have to specify a parameter for our update user. So I can quickly define one. So here is going to be close modal. And this is a function that returns void. So I can get access to it here. Okay. So here I want to dispatch the active user, and because of that, I'm going to need dispatch. And before we even get there, let's set loading to be false first. Okay. So when we're done making the request, I want to set loading to be false. Then here I can dispatch type is going to be action types dot update user. And the payload is going to be res.data. Okay. Then after doing that, we can close modal. So that means we have to update here. So we have to send the close modal to it. So close modal equals to close modal. And one thing again we can do is we can come back to the update user and show a toast that we have updated the username successfully. So here we can have toast into updated username. Okay. I think we can have type equals to success. Okay. So now let's have our on submit here. And now finger crossed, this should work. Let's confirm. So refresh. We get this page because we don't have a username. So let's make request with our username. So here we're going to have a FinGreat. Like that. And update. And when now we get this, however, one thing I noticed is that our toast did not come out. And I'm guessing this is as a result of the fact that we did some state management for the toast container. So at the time we want the toast to show, we were removing the toast container. So what we can do though to fix this, let's come back here. I think we can set a timeout. So here we can have set timeout. So we are setting the timeout to close the container. So it's going to close within 1 second. Maybe 1500 milliseconds would do. So yeah, with that, let's see what happens. However, we will need to remove the username for us to see this. Because if we refresh now, we won't get the model again because we have a username. So I can come back to my table plus. I'll pull up my DB, users here. So my other user has the username already. Okay. So we are testing for user 1. So let me remove this. Let me commit. So let's confirm again. If we refresh, now we have this again. Let me update. Okay. So I think that's better. So we get to see the prompt a little bit before the modal is removed. So that's it for our username updates. And next we can work on adding an account. So there seems to be an issue when we navigate, and I think I know why it's happening. So let's come back to our front end. Let's come back to our without. So note here that by default checking is true, so it's always going to be loading. However, we are only setting this to false when we are within here. So what that means is if active user, then we can just set checking to false. So else set checking to false. And we should be good now. Okay. So now we can access the accounting page. You can come back to our default page. And here is what we are going to be implementing when next we gather here. Bye for now. Alright guys, welcome back. So we're going to start things off by first listing our accounts. And we can easily do that by just querying the accounts API and getting our accounts. Let's come back to our code. And while we're away, I made some preparations. So I created 2 components. So the first one is to add our account, and we are going to get to that later on. And the second one is to send our account. So I thought I should share that ahead of time so that it doesn't look like I just manifested it from thin air. Okay, so we come back to the accounts itself, and here is where we want to get our accounts. So here I can have const accounts set accounts, and this is going to be use state. By default is going to be an empty array. So let's get the use state. Also, this is going to be an avenue to define the accounts type. However, let's confirm what it entails. So we come back to our table, come back to accounts. Here is the structure. We have the ID, the user ID, the balance, the currency, and the created ads. I'm going to ignore the user ID because that will be the active user. And when we are sending money in, all we need is the account ID. So all we will need from here is just the ID, balance, currency, and created ads. So let's come back here and create our account type. Okay. So now we can associate that with the state here, account type. So this is complaining because this should be an array of account type. So now we have no issue. So here we can just have this as if loading. Okay, we also need loading. So const. And here, if loading, we can have and loading accounts. And better still, we can have this within an I tag, but we'll get to that later on. So in here, when we have our accounts, it won't matter anyways. So here we can have accounts.map. And you'll be wondering, why did we ignore the ternary flow we used to have? And the simple answer there is, none of this will affect each other. So while it's loading, the account information will be an empty array. And as such, this would not output anything. And when it's done loading and it's able to get some information, then this should show whatever it needs to show. So that's just about that. So here we have access to the account here, and we have access to the index. And we can return the account card I copied earlier. So first thing first, I'm going to specify a key, which is going to be our index. Then we can get the currency from the account. Also, we can get the balance, but the expectation here should be a string. So what we'll do is we'll have account.balance.toFix. So we're going to convert it to a 2 decimal place. Then we'll convert it to a string. Okay? So that's the structure, and we can format this. All right, so if we go back to our browser, we see that we get the loading accounts, and we are going to have this because we didn't set it to be false. And that's where we have to make our requests. So we can come back here, come back to our network. We want to define the URL for our account. So export const account URL. And here we can have list base URL plus account. And I think that will be all. So this is going to get account belonging to the active user. So we can close this for now. And we're going to have a use effect here. But because we are going to be performing an async function within the use effect, let's just have it within a separate function. So we are going to have const get accounts async. And by default, we want to set loading to be true. So in case we want to call this function later on, it's going to set loading to be true. Then after setting loading to be true, we want to get our accounts. So const res equals to await ActiveUser handler. The method here is going to be a get method. The URL here is going to be account URL.list. And this is going to be is authorized. Okay. So now after making the request, we can set loading to be false. Okay. Then next we can say if res.data. Also, we need to specify the expectation for the data. So here we're going to have array of account type like that. And here we can set accounts into res.data. Okay, so that's all we have to do. Now we can have use effect. And within here, we can call get accounts. And finally, we specify our empty array. So that's all we have to do to get our accounts. Let's confirm if this is working. Okay, my token has expired. And this is another thing to note. So we are within here and we made a request with an expired token. So the expectation is that once the token has expired, it should return us back to the login page. So we can handle this by knowing the status code. So that was why we were specifying our status code when we were returning stuff from our backend. So that's very important, okay? So with that noted, we can come back to our ActiveUser handler, okay, here. So I think this ActiveUser handler should actually be a use ActiveUser handler. That way we can work with our use logout. So in the case where the token has expired, then we want to log out. So we can easily fix this by having const use Asio's handler, and that's all this is doing. And we want to move this within it. So we copy this, paste it here. And now this is going to be use Asio's handler. And that's all we have to do. But the issue here is that this is not within our hook, and it can be a CSS hook. And this is what will happen if I make it a CSS file. So if I rename CSS, then you see we have all this issue. And this is happening mainly because we have these generics here. I don't know, for some reason, it doesn't look like TypeScript is able to undo that well when it's within CSS. But we'll return it back to how it was and change this back to a TS file. And now we don't have any issue. So from here, we want to return the Asio's handler like that. And that's all we have to do here. So now we can come back here. So at the point where we are handling our error, we can check if the error is a 401 error. And in that case, that means the token has expired. Or that means there is an issue with our token and we should be logged out. So if e.response.status equals to 401 or 401 directly, then that means we should log out. And because this is just a function, we can have const with the structure equals to use logout. Okay? Then here, we can get the logout function. So in this case, we want to log out. And that's all we want to do. So that's our implementation. Let's see if there's any error. Okay, so there's a lot of error because things have changed. So let's start fixing them. So we can come back to the login. So our Asio's handler is no longer from here. So we can just cut this, remove this. Now we can have const Asio's handler equals to use Asio's handler. Okay. And as we can see, the error here has been resolved. So I can copy this for the other ones. So copy, come back to the accounts, remove the import here, and paste the new one. Okay. The same thing with the without. Remove the existing one, paste the new one. So we have not gotten to the add account yet, so I would ignore that for now. So now we've done all those, let's come back to our browser to confirm this. So as you can see, the token has expired and we are returned back here. So let's refresh. Okay, so we are here. So now I can relog in, me at example.com, there's secret. And yeah, we are back as we used to. So now I can access my account. And now I have the account. So the balance for this user is 1,000 and it only has the USD account. Okay. So the next part of our process is actually adding the account now that we can list our accounts. And this should be quite straightforward. So we'll come back to our front end. Add account seems to have an issue and it has to do with the Asio's handler. And again, we can just paste our expectation here. Update what we need, remove the existing one, and that has been fixed now. So before we get into the add account itself, we can access this from the account. So here we are going to make use of the use modal. So const equals to use modal, and here we are going to get modal content, show modal, then close modal. So down here, I can just have get modal content, and here I can have the add account. So I need to specify the close modal, and that's it. So to actually show this modal, we can do that with the add account button. So here I can have on click, show modal. Okay, so let's go back. Let's add accounts and we get this. So to add accounts, all we need is just the currency. So we can choose either NGN or USD. So we have the structure already. I've prepared this for us. So all we have to do now is come back to our front end, go back to the add account. And all we need to specify here is the currency. So we change this to currency. So this changes to currency as well. And we can confirm that the name is it. So this should be currency. And I'm actually not using the HTML4 completely because to use the HTML4, you need the ID as well. So I'm just updating this for updating sake. So I think we have everything we need. So the only difference now is that this is going to be posts and we need the add account URL. So if we come back to our network, for now, all we have is the lists. So I believe to add an account, all we have to do is have this as add. And I think the method kinds of differentiates it. So we confirm this. So we have posts and this is going to become account URL dot add. Again, this is going to be an authorized request. We will send the argument. And I think that's all we need. So here, before we close our modal, we can have accounts created successfully. Okay, let's check this out. So just to confirm, I can refresh once more, add an account. So we currently have the USD. So let me try to add the USD again and let's submit. Okay, so that page does not exist. So let's confirm what it is from the backend. Okay, so this is great. So I can confirm that, come back to my network. So plus / create, like that. So let's try again. All right, so we get the error we need to get. You already have an account with this currency, which makes sense. So let's use the NGN. So account created successfully. And so after creating the account successfully, we want to be able to refresh our account to update the UI. So let's come back here. So coming back to the add accounts. So instead of receiving the close modal, we can just have operation complete. So here I can change this to operation or complete operation, and this would be complete operation. So this is what I'm calling here now. That means if I come back to account, I'm going to change this to complete operation. However, I can come here, const complete operation. So here I'm going to close modal here. And after closing modal, I want to get accounts so I can get the updates. So that's what I want to do, and I think this makes more sense. However, now we've added all the accounts we can add because at the moment we've added all the currency available. But to test what we just did, let's create an avenue to add an extra account. So we can come back to the backend, come back to the utils, and come back to the utils.go file. So at the moment, these are the only accounts we can add, but I want to add an extra one. So GBP. Okay. So now I can add GBP account, and at the moment it's not here, so I have to include it here as well. So technically, we are supposed to have a separate endpoint to get the list of valid currency. But because our project is very small, I think we can work with what we have. So coming back to the add account, now we can include GBP. Okay, so let's come back here and test this out. Let's refresh, add account. So we can choose GBP. So let's try to see if we can send without choosing anything. So we have to select, so it makes sense. So we have GBP and submit. So account created successfully, and we close out, we get our information. Makes sense. So we are done with adding accounts, which is straightforward. So the next one is sending money. So sending money also is quite straightforward, but setting things up on the front end side can be a little bit tricky. So if we come back to our front end, come back to accounts, here is the button to send money, and it's meant to also open a modal. So let's undo this. For this, I'm going to create an enum modal state. So we have modal state on our StoreProvider. We're also going to have modal state here. And by default, the modal state is add account. So I can have add account, which is equals to add account. The second option is send money, which is equals to send money. Okay. So now we've defined the modal state. So we can also specify it here. So const modal states, set modal states. And here we can have use states. And by default, the modal states is going to be modal state dot add account. So that's the default. So when we show the modal, this is what we show. And what we want to have here is just straightforward. So here we're going to have, actually, I think we can do it in a better way. So we're going to have an object for our components. So I can just define const comps, that's components, equals to modal state dot add account. So this has to be within a square bracket. And here I can specify the component I need for this. So add account into, what does this require? Complete operation. So complete operation function. Then for the second one, modal state dot send money. And here we're going to have send money. So for the send money, it still has close modal. I'll send close modal anyway. We are going to update that later on. Actually, the close modal can be complete operation. Yeah, it's still going to work. Okay. So in here, I can just have comps into modal states. Okay, so that's a better way to handle it. This is more programmatic than the way I was thinking of doing it. So now, instead of having this as just show modal, I can have a separate function, const add account. And what I want to do here is to set modal states into modal states dot add account, then show modal. I guessed it, we're going to have the same thing for the send money as well. So this is going to be send money, and this would be send money. Okay. So now we can change this to add account. And now we can have the on click for the send money. Send money. Okay. So we have things laid out well. So let's confirm if it's working. So if we click this, we have the add account. And if we click send money, we have the send money. So the properties for the send money is not yet complete. So at the moment, we are just showing accounts. However, the send money should be getting the list of accounts. And we can easily do that if we come back here. We come back to the send money component. And here we can define an interface for this. So interface send money type. And here we want to have the complete operation, which is going to be a function that doesn't take anything and returns void. Then also we need the accounts. So here I can have accounts. And account is going to be account type, which we've not exported. So if we come back to accounts, let's export account type. So account type, an array of it, like that. So now we can replace this with the send money type. And now we have the complete operation here, then the accounts here. So we're going to update all this, so don't bother. So from accounts, here we are going to replace this with our account's information. So it's meant to be the from account ID. So here we can have accounts dot map until we have access to the account, then the index. And we are going to return the list of options. So let me just copy one of these. I can remove the rest. And now we can paste our option here. We would specify the key, which is equals to index. Then the value is going to be the account.id. However, we can show the currency as something the user would see. So we have account.currency. Well, maybe to get more information about the account, we can also add the balance to it. So we can format this a little bit. So we have account.currency, then dash dollar account.balance. Okay? And let's convert the balance to a 2-digit, so to fix into 2. So we don't have to convert it to string in this case because it's already a string. So let's format things which we have, and it's looking better now. So if we save this, we have an issue on the account section. So now the account needs this to be complete operation, and it needs the accounts. So accounts equals to accounts. Okay. So I'm going to fix the error here later on, but let's come back to test what we have. So if I click on send money, so now if I choose this, I get to see my account and I can see the balance within it. So let's come back to our code and actually fix this. So send money. So first thing, let's define the URL. So here we're going to duplicate this, and this would be send money or transfer. So it's not transfer on the backend. I'm going to use transfer here as well. And the URL is transfer. Okay, cool. So now back here, you will get the properties. So here is going to be from account underscore ID. We duplicate this to account ID and finally the amount. So this should be 2 and not TP. So if I'm not guessing wrong, this should be from account ID. This should be to account ID. And this should be amount. So this is going to be post request. We are not expecting anything from here, not anything that we need. And the URL here is going to be the account URL.transfer. And it's an authorized request. Oh, okay, I think I see the error here. So we are still getting the Axios handler directly. So this has to change, so we can remove this for now. And instead, we are going to have const, like that. Then we have use Axios handler. And now we can have the Axios handler, and we don't have any error again. So this time around, we can have this as transfer successful, and we don't need to dispatch anything, so we remove this, and this one will be complete operation. Also, we want to change this to 2000, and we are good. So let's remove some of the stuff we no longer need. We don't need the use effect as well. And also, let's confirm if the name we are obtaining here is what we actually defined. So here we have the from account ID, which is correct. Again, the HTML4 in this case is not compulsory because we are not using it the right way in the first place. So to account ID seems to be correct as well. Then the amount is correct. So let's confirm if this is working. So I'll refresh just to confirm and send money. So I want to confirm the account I want to send money to. So I can come back to my table plus. I can check the account. So at the moment, I only have my account. So there is no account we can actually send money to. So let's create one. So this is going to come by itself. Here I can have user ID 2. The balance will come by default. The account here would be USD, and the other ones will come by default. So let me run this. Oh, looks like we have some account that I've not checked before. Yeah, we do, because I created some from the front end and I've not refreshed this place to actually see it. But now they are here and they are associated with the user ID 1. And now we have an account for the user ID 2. The ID of that account is 5 and the currency is USD. So let's come back here. Let's select the USD account and let's just use ID maybe 6 and amount. And for the amount, I'll just specify for 300 because we have 1,000. Let's see what happens. Oh, okay. So we have another issue here. And the issue is tricky but straightforward. So Go is expecting this in the right form. However, at the moment, everything is being sent as a string. So it won't be able to handle the conversion like we expect. So instead, the account ID is meant to be an integer. So we're going to pass int, then send in our information. The same thing for the tool account ID as well. We pass int, we send in our information. However, in the case of the amount, it's going to be a float. So we are going to pass float, and we send in our information. So let's confirm if this is working now. So nothing has changed. Let's try to make the request again. So as we can see, cannot find account to send to because the account we specified here is invalid. So the valid one is actually 5, which makes sense. And we won't send from USD, we will send from NGN, and let's see what happens. We don't have any money in NGN anyways. So currencies do not match. So it verifies if the currencies match before even trying to check the balance. So that's okay. So now we can send from USD. However, let's send above our balance. So technically, we won't be able to do this on a validated front end because the front end will probably want to match with the account we've specified. But again, we also need this validation on the back end as well, so that in case someone override what we have on the front end, they won't be able to bypass the back end. So let's submit again. And now we get you do not have enough balance. So all our validation seems to be working. So now let's try to send with the right information. So 300 seems to be good enough. So let's submit. And voila, we get transfer successful. And after coming back, we have our account updated. So technically, if we come back here, we should be able to see the list of our transaction. But I think we've spent a lot of time on this already. So we still have a lot to do with our fintech project, but we've done the major part as we can see. So handling transfer seems to be one of the most important parts of any fintech application. So in our next episode, we will still be talking about the account, but there we are going to integrate the transaction page. And also we are going to talk about what actually happens when we make transfer to a different system. In this case, we are going to need a settlement process. Well, we won't be able to achieve a settlement process in our case because it requires some licensing. However, it's a straightforward process and I'm going to discuss it. So guys, if you enjoyed the module, if you enjoyed this episode, and if you enjoyed the series so far, kindly leave a thumbs up, add comments to let me know what you feel about everything, and share with your friends and family. And that will be all for today. Bye and see you in the next one.